I still remember that morning with crystal clarity. The sterile scent of polished wood, the faint hum of the air conditioner, and the heavy silence that filled the lawyer's office like a fog you couldn't breathe through. I sat there with my hands clasped in my lap, fingers digging into each other as if pressure alone could stop me from falling apart. Losing both my parents had left me hollow, suspended between grief and confusion. Everything happened so fast. The car accident, the funeral, the condolences from people who barely knew us. I thought today at least would bring some sense of closure. I was wrong. Daniel sat across from me, perfectly composed as always. My older brother had the kind of confidence that could fill a room. Even in mourning, he wore it like armor. A tailored suit, sleek hair, polished shoes. The golden child. My parents' pride. Everything about him said success and control, while I was still trying to remember to breathe. He caught me looking at him and gave me a small, almost mocking smile. "You okay?" he whispered, his tone laced with impatience more than concern. I nodded, too tired to argue. The lawyer, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like dry paper, cleared his throat and began reading the will. "To our beloved son Daniel," he said, "we leave the family home, the car, and our majority shares in the company." I saw Daniel's jaw tighten in satisfaction, his hand brushing his cufflinks as if sealing his triumph. I felt a flicker of bitterness, but quickly smothered it. I had expected as much, then came my name. "To our daughter Emma," the lawyer continued, "we leave a box." I blinked. "A box?" I thought I misheard. But the lawyer repeated it, this time lifting a small, dust-covered wooden chest from his briefcase and setting it gently on the desk before me. I stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. My throat tightened, the humiliation sharp and raw. Daniel's smirk was instant. "Well," he murmured, leaning back in his chair, "guess Mom and Dad knew you liked old stuff." I wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. The lawyer gave me a polite, sympathetic smile, though I could tell he didn't want to get involved. "Your parents left a note carved on the top," he said quietly, sliding it toward me. "It says, 'For when the time is right.'" The phrase echoed in my mind as I carried the box home. It was light, too light to hold anything meaningful. I placed it on my kitchen table and stared at it for hours. The wood was scratched, worn at the corners, and the lock rusted but was still functional. It didn't look valuable, yet something about it demanded attention. The faint scent of lavender lingered from the past, my mother's perfume. My eyes burned. That night I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional creak of pipes and the ticking clock on the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces. My father's stern frown, my mother's sad smile. We'd never been close, not really. They were strict, reserved, more business partners than parents. I spent my childhood in the background, learning early that silence kept the peace. Daniel had always been their focus, their investment. He was destined to inherit everything, and he knew it. I thought about the fights I used to overhear late at night, my mother's muffled sobs, my father's sharp tone, doors slamming shut. I never understood what they were fighting about. I told myself every family had secrets, and some were better left alone. But as the box sat in front of me, something inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time to know. By morning, I made up my mind. I sat at the table, the weak sunlight spilling through the curtains, and slowly lifted the lid. The hinges groaned as if they hadn't been opened in years. Inside, nestled beneath a layer of dust, were a few small objects, nothing that screamed inheritance. Just old photographs. Some brittle letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small rusty key, and a folded piece of paper with my mother's handwriting on it. It said only one thing. "You deserve to know the truth." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath hitch, my heart pounding in my chest. Truth about what? I stared at the paper as though the ink might rearrange itself into answers. My hands shook as I picked up one of the photographs, a younger version of my parents standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. My father looked the same as always, rigid and proud. But my mother's smile, it was softer than I remembered, her eyes bright and alive. Beneath the photos, I found another slip of paper, half burned at the edges. It was an old receipt, dated years ago, from a small property near a lake. I didn't know we even owned a lake house. My mind buzzed with questions, each one sharper than the last. Why leave this to me? Why now? I spent the rest of the day sorting through every item. Some letters were sealed, others already opened, their ink faded but still legible. My mother's handwriting was familiar, looping and delicate, every line careful. One of the letters began with, "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means we are gone, and it's finally safe for you to know." I stopped there, my pulse racing. Safe from what? I didn't read further that night. I couldn't. The weight of it all was too much. The funeral, the inheritance, the confusion that came with realizing I had been given something that wasn't money, but meaning. I put the letters back into the box and closed it, locking it again even though I didn't have to. I needed time to breathe. The next few days passed in a blur. Daniel called once, gloating about how he was already meeting with investors for the company. "You should really think about what you're going to do next," he said casually. "Mom and Dad might have loved you, but let's be real. You were never part of the business. Maybe sell that little box of yours on eBay or something." I hung up before he could say more. I didn't want to hear it. Something inside me told me the box wasn't just a sentimental gesture. My mother wasn't the kind of woman who did things without reason. There was purpose in everything she did, even in silence. That night, I sat in the dark with the box open in front of me. The letters spread across the table like fragments of a forgotten story. I picked up the rusty key and turned it over in my palm. It was small, intricate, the kind that might belong to an old door or a safe. I tried it on the box, but it didn't fit. It wasn't meant for that. My gaze fell on the lake house receipt again. Maybe the key belonged there. The thought was absurd, but I couldn't shake it. The lake property listed on the old paper was in a small town about 2 hours away. I hadn't been there since I was a child, but I remembered vague flashes, water shimmering under the sun, my mother laughing as she held my hand, my father watching from the porch with that same distant look. The place had always felt like a dream, a brief escape from the cold reality of our home. As I stared at the photograph of my mother, something in me stirred, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. I needed to go there. Not for money, not even for closure, but because that single line, "You deserve to know the truth," had ignited something in me. A spark of curiosity, of defiance, of longing for answers I didn't know I was missing. The next morning, I packed a small bag and placed the wooden box carefully inside. Before leaving, I took one last look around my apartment. Everything felt ordinary, safe, familiar. But deep down, I knew that by opening that box, I had already crossed a line. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "Whatever this is, Mom, I'm ready to know." The drive to the lake was long and winding, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The closer I got, the more the world around me began to blur with memory. Every mile pulled me deeper into the past, back to summers when I was small, when love still felt simple and laughter echoed through the walls. When I finally arrived, the cabin stood exactly as I remembered, weathered but strong. Surrounded by tall pines and the soft hush of the lake, it felt both foreign and familiar, like stepping into a photograph. I carried the box inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, and set it down on the old dining table. Dust motes floated in the sunlight filtering through the windows, illuminating the room in a golden haze. I sat in silence, heart hammering, as the weight of what I'd discovered settled over me. This wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about what my parents owed me or didn't. It was about truth, something far more valuable and far more dangerous. I didn't know what I would find next, but I knew one thing for certain. My mother had left me this path for a reason. And whatever secrets waited beyond that door, I was finally ready to open them. The drive back to the lake house the following morning was both haunting and strangely peaceful. The mist rolled off the water like a veil, curling through the trees and wrapping the old cabin in a ghostly stillness. I parked in the same gravel spot we used when I was a child, and for a long moment, I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the reflection of the gray sky ripple across the lake. I had barely slept. Every word from my mother's letter replayed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't turn off. You deserve to know the truth. I didn't know if I was ready, but I also knew I couldn't go back without answers. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, though time had stripped it of warmth. The porch boards groaned beneath my feet, and the once bright blue paint had faded to a dull gray. I pushed open the door, and the scent of dust, wood, and faint lavender greeted me. The same smell that clung to the wooden box. It was as if my mother's presence still lingered in the air, quiet but unyielding. I set the box on the table where the light from the window fell across it and took a deep breath before lifting the lid again. The letters inside felt heavier now, their weight emotional rather than physical. I untied the faded ribbon and opened the next one, written in my mother's familiar looping script. My dear Emma, if you're reading this, then it means you've lost us. I wish I could have told you sooner, but your father would never have allowed it. You were always too kind, too pure for the world we built around you. I swallowed hard and kept reading. I need you to understand that not everything you grew up believing was true. Daniel is not your real brother. And the man you called father, he isn't the one who gave you life. My breath hitched, my pulse drumming in my ears. I reread the sentence again and again, as if repetition would make it make sense. But it didn't. My father, not my father? Daniel, not my brother? The world I had known began to fracture in slow motion. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Years before you were born, the letter continued. I met someone who changed my life. His name was Elliot. He was kind, thoughtful, and everything your father wasn't. He loved me, Emma, truly loved me, and he wanted you more than anything. But when I found out I was pregnant, your father discovered it too. He threatened to destroy Elliot's life, his career, everything he had. So I stayed silent. I chose to raise you under his name, hoping someday you would understand. Tears blurred the words. I pressed my palm against my mouth, choking back a sound I didn't recognize, a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief. All those years I had wondered why my mother looked at me with a sadness that seemed deeper than words, why my father treated me with a cold distance that went beyond discipline. It all made sense now. I left you the box because I know your father's truth will eventually come for you. The letter went on. He built his empire on lies, and Daniel was raised to protect it. But inside that box is the real legacy, one of truth and choice. Use it wisely. I stared at the final line for a long time before folding the letter and setting it aside. I needed air. I stepped outside and stood by the water, the wind cold against my face. The lake had always been my mother's refuge. When I was a child, she used to bring me here on weekends when my father traveled. She'd say, "The water remembers, even when people forget." I never understood what she meant until now. After a few minutes, I went back inside and examined the rest of the box. Beneath the letters, I found an old photograph. It showed my mother standing beside a man I didn't recognize, tall, with gentle eyes, a warm smile that reached all the way to his soul. On the back, written in her neat handwriting, were 3 words. Elliot, your real father. I ran my thumb over the name, tracing the faded ink as tears welled in my eyes again. There was something comforting about his face, as though I had seen it before. In a dream, maybe, or in the mirror when I smiled. The rusty key from the box suddenly caught my attention. I picked it up, turning it in my fingers. If it wasn't meant for the box, then it must open something else. My mother's letter had mentioned the cabin by the lake, this very place. Maybe the key belonged here. I began searching, moving through the cabin slowly, every creak of the floor echoing in the quiet. In the back room, behind an old dresser, I found a small wooden chest half covered in dust. My heart pounded as I knelt and tried the key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open, the sound sharp in the still air. Inside were files, more letters, and several leather-bound notebooks. The first folder I opened stopped my heart cold. It was full of business documents, contracts, tax records, and wire transfers, all bearing my father's company name. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. But the deeper I read, the darker the truth became. Hidden among the pages were copies of offshore account statements, false invoices, and signatures that didn't belong to my mother. I realized what I was looking at: evidence. Evidence of corruption, fraud, and illegal transactions that could destroy everything my father had built. My mother had gathered it all. She had known. She had been documenting his crimes for years. There was another letter tucked between the papers, written in her slightly shakier handwriting. "Emma, if you've found this, it means you're beginning to see what I couldn't say out loud. Your father's business is built on exploitation and deceit. The people he calls partners are criminals hiding behind polished smiles." I tried to stop him, but every time I got close, he reminded me what I stood to lose: you. So I kept quiet. But silence is its own kind of poison. And one day, it begins to kill you from the inside. I felt sick. The woman I thought was fragile had actually been fighting a quiet war. And all the while, I had resented her for being distant, for seeming cold. Now I understood. She was protecting me. Beneath the files was another smaller envelope labeled in bold ink, "For when you're ready." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note. The key wasn't just for this box. There's a safe under the floorboards. It holds what you'll need if the truth ever needs to be seen. I scanned the floor until I found a small panel beneath the rug. The wood lifted easily, revealing a metal safe embedded in the ground. The same key fit perfectly. I turned it, and the door opened with a groan. Inside was a USB drive, a notebook filled with handwritten accounts, and one final letter. I picked it up with trembling hands. "My sweet girl," it began, "if you ever feel small, remember this: truth is power. And sometimes, the only inheritance worth having is justice. If the world ever makes you feel voiceless, use this to speak. You are stronger than both of us combined. And maybe, through you, the lies will finally end." I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face, the letter pressed against my chest. The truth wasn't just about my bloodline. It was about everything my mother had endured in silence. The box wasn't a punishment. It was a map. And I was standing at the beginning of a path that could change everything. For hours, I sat surrounded by papers, letters, and memories. Every page I read deepened the story: hidden accounts, offshore properties, fake charities, exploited workers, families ruined by greed. My father wasn't just a hard man. He was a criminal hiding behind the illusion of success. And Daniel, my so-called brother, was being groomed to continue it all. By the time the sun began to set, I felt a quiet rage simmering beneath my grief. I could hear my mother's voice in my mind, calm but firm. Truth is power. She had risked everything to leave this for me. She hadn't trusted the lawyers or the will. She trusted me. I gathered the letters and placed them back into the box, careful not to lose a single piece. My reflection in the cabin window looked unfamiliar, older, stronger, someone who had just lost everything yet found something far greater. As darkness fell over the lake, I knew I couldn't keep this secret. My mother had carried the burden of silence for too long. Now it was my turn to act. I whispered into the night, "I understand now, Mom. You didn't leave me anything. You left me everything. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like the heir to something real, not wealth, not status, but truth. And that truth was about to change everything." For weeks, I lived between two worlds, the quiet isolation of the lake house and the deafening storm of truth that waited inside those boxes. Every letter, every document, every signature became another thread in a web of lies that my father had spun for decades. I slept on the couch, ate when I remembered to, and read until my eyes burned. I filled notebooks with dates, connections, and names. What began as confusion slowly turned into clarity, and clarity turned into fire. I realized that my mother hadn't left me behind. She had left me a mission. The box wasn't my inheritance. It was her unfinished fight. I drove back to the city with the box seatbelted beside me like a living thing. The skyline rose through the fog, sharp and cold, just as I remembered it. My father's company building stood tallest among them, its mirrored glass reflecting a sky that looked almost bruised. I parked across the street, staring up at the name embossed in silver letters, Davenport Holdings. My last name? A name that suddenly felt foreign on my tongue. Daniel's car was already in the executive lot when I arrived. I didn't plan on seeing him, but I needed to look him in the eye one last time before the truth did what it was meant to do. I walked into the lobby, the marble floors echoing with every step. The receptionist's polite smile faltered when she saw me. Miss Davenport, she said cautiously, your brother isn't expecting— I know, I interrupted, calm but cold. Tell him I'm here to give him something our parents left behind. Minutes later, I was standing in his office. The view behind him was spectacular. Glass walls overlooking the city, sunlight pouring in like gold. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. Emma, you look terrible. What is this about? I set the box on his desk. It's about the truth, I said softly. He frowned, confusion quickly turning into annoyance. You're still hung up on that stupid box? Emma, you got sentimental junk. Mom's old trinkets. Meanwhile, I'm trying to keep this company alive. I held his gaze. Alive, or built on a graveyard of lies? His expression darkened. What are you talking about? I opened the folder I'd brought with me, copies of everything I'd found in the cabin. Offshore accounts, forged contracts, shell companies under fake names. I know what Dad did, and I know you've been continuing it. His face drained of color. You have no idea what you're saying. Oh, I do, I whispered. And so will everyone else. He lunged across the desk, slamming the folder shut. You listen to me, he hissed. Dad built this empire for us. You think you can just waltz in with your moral high ground and destroy everything? You'll ruin the family name. Maybe the family name deserves to be ruined, I said. For a moment, silence filled the room. Thick, trembling silence. His eyes were wild, veins pulsing at his temple. I saw for the first time not my brother, but a man who had inherited not just wealth, but the rot that came with it. Get out, he spat finally. Before you regret this. But as I turned to leave, I realized something strange. I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. That night, I sat in a small cafe, the box beside me, and searched through the contacts in my mother's letters. There was one name underlined twice. Clara Hensley, investigative journalist. A memory flickered. My mother on the phone years ago, speaking in hushed tones, saying, I can't talk right now. It's not safe. Clara must have been the one she trusted. I found Clara's email online and sent her a message. Just one line. I have the evidence your source tried to hide 15 years ago. It's time, she replied within hours. We met in a quiet corner of a library cafe the next morning. She was older now, gray hair tied back, her eyes sharp and skeptical. When I placed the box on the table, she hesitated before opening it. She read the first few pages, her lips parting in shock. My God, she whispered. This could bring down half the boardroom. I don't want revenge, I told her. I want truth, she nodded slowly. Truth has consequences. Are you ready for that? I've been ready my whole life, I said. Over the next few weeks, we worked together, verifying documents, cross-checking names, tracing money trails that led through charities, political donations, and overseas companies. Clara moved with precision, like someone who had been waiting for this moment for years. She told me once, quietly, that she'd tried to expose my father before, but was silenced with threats and lawsuits. Your mother must have known, she said. She must have gathered this to finish what I started. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Calls, messages, emails. Breaking news. Davenport Holdings under federal investigation. The headline was everywhere. Clara's article was thorough, undeniable. There was no hiding from it. By noon, reporters crowded outside my building. By evening, Daniel called. His voice was hoarse, furious, and cracking with panic. "What did you do, Emma? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I told the truth," I said. "You destroyed everything." He shouted. "No," I whispered. I freed it. The line went dead. In the following days, chaos unfolded like a storm that wouldn't stop. The company's stock plummeted. Executives resigned. Investigators raided offices, seizing files and computers. Former employees came forward with stories of exploitation and fraud. My father's once respected name became synonymous with scandal. But amid the noise, I felt a strange stillness. I walked through the city, the autumn air sharp and cool, and realized how light I felt for the first time in years. The truth had weight, yes, but it was the kind of weight that steadied you, not crushed you. Daniel tried to reach me again, this time from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Later, I learned through the news that he had been charged with obstruction and fraud. The mansion was listed for sale to cover his legal fees. The empire my parents had built on deceit had finally collapsed. I thought it would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like peace. A month later, I drove back to the lake house one last time. The leaves had turned golden, the water reflecting the fire of autumn. I carried the box to the edge of the dock, where my mother used to sit with me as a child. I opened it and let the letters breathe in the wind. For the first time, I didn't feel like a lost daughter or an outsider. I felt like a woman who had found her purpose. I kept one letter, the first one she wrote to me, and the photograph of Elliot, my real father. The rest I placed gently back in the box and set it down on the dock beside me. In the weeks that followed, I sold the cabin. It had served its purpose. It had given me truth, but now it was time to build something of my own. I used the money not for comfort, but for change. I founded a small organization dedicated to helping women who had been silenced or betrayed by those closest to them. I called it the Light Box. The name felt right. My mother's box had been my light in the darkness, guiding me toward freedom. Now it would do the same for others. On the day we opened the foundation, I stood before a small group of women, some survivors of financial abuse, others of emotional control. I told them my story, not the public version splashed across headlines, but the real one. Sometimes, I said, we're given boxes that don't look like gifts, but inside them are the pieces we need to rebuild ourselves. My mother left me one. I want to pass that light to you. The applause was soft, but it felt genuine. A woman in the front row reached out and touched my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making something good out of something broken." That night, I sat alone in my office, the wooden box on my desk. The wood was worn smooth now, the carvings faded, but the energy inside it still pulsed quietly, alive, eternal. I ran my fingers over the words, "for when the time is right." My mother had known exactly when that time would come. I opened the lid one last time. Inside, there was only the photograph and a small folded note I hadn't seen before. My breath caught as I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "I knew you would do it, Emma. Truth always finds its voice through those who listen. I am proud of you. Love, Mom." Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from release. The circle was complete. The secrets buried in silence had finally spoken. As I closed the lid, the words echoed softly in my heart. Some treasures don't shine. They guide. And in that moment, I understood. The box had never been about wealth, inheritance, or revenge. It had been about redemption, hers, mine, and maybe even the family name she once tried to save. I turned off the light, leaving the box on the desk beneath the faint glow of the moon. Outside, the world was still full of noise. Lawsuits, headlines, whispers. But inside, I felt quiet, steady, and whole. The box wasn't my punishment. It was my freedom, my justice, my beginning.